Is it cruel and inhumane, or a better approach to undocumented migrants?
Our compassion may be infinite, but our capacity to help people is not.
The UK wants to send asylum seekers to Rwanda for processing and resettling. But is the controversial scheme even legal? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's newsmaker is Britain's asylum plan. From Afghanistan and Syria to Yemen and Ukraine, just 4 places millions have been forced to flee as they fight for survival. Last year, almost 30,000 people risked their lives to make the perilous journey across the English Channel. But a controversial new plan could see them handed a one-way ticket to Rwanda, 6,500 kilometers away.
Last week, I signed a new world-leading migration and economic development partnership with Rwanda. Under this partnership, those who travel to the UK by illegal and dangerous routes, including by small boats across the Channel, may be relocated to Rwanda, where they will have their asylum claims considered.
British Home Secretary Priti Patel has spoken of the UK's long and proud history of offering sanctuary to refugees, but her plan to send asylum seekers to East Africa is causing outrage. And it's not just coming from the opposition. Many inside the Conservative Party, including former Prime Minister Theresa May, outright reject Patel's plan.
I do not support the removal to Rwanda policy on the grounds of legality, practicality, and efficacy.
Over the past few years, there's been a dramatic rise in the number of people making the English Channel crossing. In 2019, about 1,800 people made the journey. The following year, almost 5 times that number arrived in the UK. Then in 2021, the number more than tripled to almost 30,000. And as of just March this year, at least 4,500 people have made their way. Now, while some make it across successfully, many others do not. In November, at least 27 refugees and asylum seekers drowned in the waters between France and the UK. It was the single largest loss of life in the English Channel since the UN started keeping records. But human rights activists argue all the risks, plus the UK's proposal to send them to Rwanda, will not stop asylum seekers from making the journey.
We have years of evidence from Australia about precisely this policy measure, which has done nothing to stop people coming to Australia seeking asylum.
Well, in spite of the example set by Australia, the UK legislation is being pushed forward. So let's look at the pros and cons and potential legal issues with our panel. And joining me now from London is Sile Reynolds. She is the head of asylum advocacy at Freedom from Torture. Also from London, we have Stephen Woolfe. He is the director of the Centre for Migration and Economic Prosperity and a former member of the European Parliament with the UK Independence Party. And from Copenhagen is Sofie Allarp. She is a lawyer and political commentator who also served as International Secretary for Denmark's Social Democrat Party. Thanks all so much for being with us. You know, many were actually shocked when Denmark proposed using Rwanda as an offshore facility, especially after the controversy of the Manus and Nauru Island detention centers being used by Australia. Yet here we are with the UK looking at exactly the same policy after, I must mention, it failed with Albania. So Stephen Woolfe, why does the UK want to do what went pretty badly for Australia already? And do they think they can do it better, or do they even care what precedent's been set?
Well, I think there are 3 particular reasons why the UK government want to have this policy. The first is that they wish to send out a message to the people traffickers that there is no easy route back into the UK anymore, and that your model of saying to those people coming over to the UK that once you're here, you will stay here and never be returned, is finished with. The second is to send out a message to those in terms of politics, that there is a recognition, particularly in the red wall northern seats of England, that are deeply concerned about mass migration coming into the country, that we finally listen to our promises over Brexit. And a third, I think, is really practical, and that is that we're running out of space to actually house those people coming into the country. There is already a huge lack of hotel space. The government is spending, according to them, £4.7 million a year. According to other surveys I've had, £5.2 million per day on hotels, in addition to hosting them in longer term accommodation. So I think those are the three particular reasons. And as for your last question, do they think they can make it work? I think they do. It will be difficult. It's not going to be easy, but I think they have to try and make it work. Otherwise, a failure will lead them to be seen to be a failure across many, many political seats that they potentially could lose.
Okay, I want to pick up on the first and last points you made in just a minute. But first, let me ask Sile about that message that is being sent on the political front, because you're particularly suspicious of the timing of this proposal, Sile, just as Boris Johnson had to apologize, for breaking his own laws. So do you think this really is just more about distraction than sound, workable policy?
I think certainly the timing of the announcement, as you mentioned, the decision to announce it last week, was a deliberate effort to distract from the problems that the Prime Minister was facing in terms of the fixed penalty notices that he received for acting unlawfully during COVID. But we know that these plans have been in the pipeline for quite some time. They have been trailed in earlier announcements related to the new plan for immigration, which the government consulted on early last year, and they've been talked about extensively. We've seen various other countries touted as possible locations for sending our asylum seekers. So this has been a policy that the government has been looking to pursue for quite some time. I think it is going to backfire in terms of the message to the public that this government is taking control of the issues or the problems that it has identified around asylum. I don't think that this is the message that the British public want to hear. I don't think they're looking for this kind of a solution to the problems that have been presented around the challenges of international migration and the pressures on the UK's asylum system. We have seen an outpouring of compassion within this country towards refugees over the past few months in response to the Ukraine crisis, but also in response to earlier crises related to Syria and Afghanistan. The British public want this country to be a country that welcomes refugees. So I think this policy and the timing of this policy and the announcement just before the local elections on the 5th of May is going to hurt the government, if anything, certainly amongst the British public that really do want us to be a country that welcomes
Okay.
refugees.
Right. I mean, I can see Stephen disagrees, but let me get to Sofie Allarp, because the party you used to work for, has been pushing almost identical legislation in Denmark to send asylum seekers to Rwanda. Where does that legislation actually stand in the more than a year that it's been on the agenda in Denmark?
Well, right now, and I'd like to just start by stressing that I'm not speaking for the party. I'm no longer a member of the Social Democrats. So I am speaking as an independent person. I've studied politics very much, and I am also a lawyer with a master's in refugee law, among other. And this was an election promise from the current government, so the Social Democrats. They wanted to sort of do away with all the problems in this asylum system that we all know, and they wanted to do it by offshoring the refugees that would reach the Danish borders. And they started immediately after entering into government in 2019. They started immediately with that effort. They appointed an ambassador to spearhead the effort. They started negotiating with different African countries. A lot of the countries I know just
Similar
set
to the
flat.
UK.
Yes, and I know that there is some headway. I mean, that's what the rumor has, at least. And I also know that the government has called in different parties of parliament to discuss this headway. There's no more information than that, but they do also have a law, which is quite a peculiar law that they passed last year, which doesn't really govern anything, but gives a mandate to the government to set up this kind of system.
Okay, so it could be legal, is what you're saying. It could be actually finally put into practice. Is there any time scale?
Well, there's no timescale because obviously the law didn't govern anything in particular. It didn't govern anything concrete. It governed a wish to establish a system like this. Obviously, that is a peculiar law because normally a law legislates something, but it was more, I think, to be seen as a negotiation mandate to the government. The government, there's an election coming up, so we don't know exactly if the government will manage to set up a system like this.
But I mean,
If
legally, it's proving very difficult to get done. And there will be lawsuits, will there not?
Well, I mean, I think you have to consider the sort of international legal aspect and the national legal aspect. It is clear that in the Danish parliament, there's a vast majority in favor of a system like this. So in terms of Danish politics, this can be done. Is it conform with the refugee convention? Well, that really depends on how it's done. If it's done such that we can guarantee that no one is going to be sent back to danger, then it could be
Okay.
legal.
Very
Uh,
interesting.
yeah, internationally.
Right. I have to go back to Stephen because I need to return to that first point you made. We'll have to sort out the legal issues, and they're going to be pretty complicated in the UK in particular. But you said there needs to be a clear message sent to people smugglers. Do you have proof, though, that this would actually deter people smugglers? Because who's to say that it won't encourage them to work even harder in order to avoid getting these people, their own customers, sent to Rwanda? Instead, they're just going to look for more clandestine ways to get these people into the country. It might actually inspire them.
Well, I don't think the people traffickers need much inspiration to be able to make the vast sums of money that they are making, estimated last year just around £250 million. And if the numbers come through this year of 80,000, they'll be edging up towards £400 million in a year. So it's big business for them, and it's very important. The first point in response to you is that we are now concentrating on those channel migrants coming across in the boats, but we're still seeing them coming across in the backs of lorries and occasionally into planes. They have been using lorries and trains and vehicles clandestinely for the past 10 years. So their model is still there. It still needs to work. And the reason why we're trying to break it down through, or rather the government is trying to break it down in this way, is to say to them, the most important message the people traffickers do is say to those who they're either A, receiving income from, or B, doing the lending model, because there's a massive lending model that people traffickers do in terms of loans to these individuals, is that when you get to the United Kingdom, we can guarantee that you will never be returned. And that's pretty much true. Very few people are ever returned, even those that fail the appeals system. This is very different to them. Now they're saying, well, we'll lend you 5, 10, up to £12,500 is the average cost from, say, Afghanistan. That is now, how will that be repaid if you go to Rwanda? So yes, they will still try to sneak them in through lorries, and they will still try to get them in different ways, no different than they did in the past. But the potential loss of income will actually start to make them think again.
So, Stephen, I just have to ask you quickly. I mean, you outline all these ways that, all the reasons why this legislation would be so logical, this whole scheme would be so logical, and how it's going to work. It's a win-win for people on both sides. If that is the case, why are leaders within the Conservative Party, not least David Davis, saying that this would create a British Guantanamo Bay, the whole system of offshoring? Why is there so much resistance from inside the Conservative Party if all this is so easily workable?
Well, David Davis is somebody that I know very well, and it was actually quite surprising to hear him come out in opposition. The Conservative Party is a broad church, but I wouldn't say that it is a huge group of people that are actually opposing this particular message. It is probably a fifth or a sixth of the party that are raising some issues, and many of them, the bulk of them, are actually those who are supportive of a larger scale migration system. But that isn't to say that this particular method of dealing with the channel migrants and taking them to Rwanda won't be beset with problems. Of course it will be. there are bound to be first initial court cases, and I imagine that they'll start attacking the policy on the basis that Rwanda is deemed to be an unsafe country, one where there has been previous problems with, say, journalists or politicians who oppose the party. I recognize that. The second will be, as your previous speaker just mentioned, is whether the system effectively allows someone who is successful in an appeal to be able to return. So let's not say that this is the easiest situation, but it is a start that the Conservative Party see. There will be problems with it.
I'm sorry, the successful appeal, they will be able to return. So first, I mean, because the plan as per now is that even if their application succeeds, they will still have to stay in Rwanda.
Absolutely. And that's why I think that there will be court appeals by lawyers.
And I mean, at what cost? That is such a prolonged process and extremely expensive. Why not, if their application is successful, allow them to come in? What's the problem?
But there is, and that's where the legal cases are going to face. But in terms of the cost, there are enormous costs. We've done research on this. In the first year, the average cost for any channel migrant or any migrant that comes across in terms of even the boats is about 40,000. This year, if you add in the estimated 80,000 to potentially 120,000 refugees also coming from Ukraine, we're looking at an overall cost of between 3.2 billion to 4 billion just for the new people coming in. And I think that's also an issue within government at the moment of deep financial crisis. So they're looking for ways that they can shave money off in some places.
Okay, Sile, let me come back to you. And with some of the proponents of these ideas, you know, say that it's often said by human rights defenders like yourself that human smugglers would not be prospering if people were just able to follow legal routes to, legal routes of asylum through legitimate systems. But tell us, how could any bureaucracy actually manage the sheer number of people wanting to apply, especially when they bring no documentation with them? And also, wouldn't applicants increase even further if there were a more civilized way, an easier way to come to the country?
I mean, let's be clear at the outset that there is no legal way to come to the UK to seek asylum. There is no asylum visa that you can apply for from another country in order to come to the UK to seek asylum. There are resettlement routes, and we support efforts by the UK previously and efforts that are now being made, including by Conservative MPs, to get this government to commit to a more generous target for resettling refugees from around the world to the UK. Now, this government has refused to engage with those proposals for expanding our resettlement capacity. Resettlement is just one mechanism that can be used to bring people in need of protection to the UK. Family reunion is another. A lot of these proposals have been made over, particularly over the past 6 months, as the Nationality and Borders Bill has been going through Parliament, and the government has refused to engage. So let's just be clear that there is no legal route to claim asylum in the UK, and the routes that do exist to bring recognised refugees through resettlement to the UK are very limited. Now, this puts people in a very difficult situation where if they do not have any other mechanism by which to come to the UK to seek protection legally, they have to take their lives into their own hands and take these irregular routes, these dangerous routes. Nobody would get in a boat in northern France to cross the Channel unless they had any other option. We know this because this is what our clients tell us when we speak to them. These are desperate people fleeing for their lives, and that is why they take the ultimate risk. And let's be clear, they are risking their lives coming across the Channel, and there is no greater disincentive than the risk of death. So the very idea that tweaks to our asylum regulations and policy are going to deter people from continuing to take those journeys is completely unfounded. There is no evidence to suggest that this will work as any kind of deterrent effect. It didn't work in the Australian context as a deterrent effect. It didn't work, and it hasn't worked in terms of our existing efforts to deter people through the inadmissibility rules that have been in place since December 2020. They haven't worked. People continue to come because people need protection and they are fleeing for their lives. And we need to look at the reasons why people continue to flee, rather than continuing to pursue these ill-founded, ill-thought-out, horrific, horrendous, absolutely inhumane proposals to punish people simply because they are fleeing for their lives.
Right. I mean, so again, we saw it pretty much fail in the case of Australia, Sile, you believe. And Stephen, I saw you shake your head when Sile said they really have no other option because there are no legal channels for them to come through anyway, even when they do have legitimate claims. Why did you shake your head? You do think they have other options?
It's not that I don't believe or disagree that there are no current legal options, as Shirley has said, but the no other options are then other than to come to the UK is utterly incorrect. When I went into the camps way back in 2014 and 15 in Calais, it was made very clear to me that people wanted to come to the United Kingdom because they spoke the language, they had friends there, it was easier to get jobs. But they do have options. They have options to stay in Germany, they have options to stay in Belgium, they have options to stay in France. So
but
they
shouldn't
do have
everyone
options.
take a fair share? They are staying in Germany. Germany's taken in more than any other country.
But that is a different question as to whether they have options. The question is whether the countries, as we very well clearly know, I was only reading the World Bank's recent assessments on immigration and kind of asylum across the world, is now indicating, and even organizations like the World Bank are beginning to recognize that there are genuine refugees and those that are regarded as economic migrants. And what we have is why people are reacting differently to those coming from the Ukraine, where you immediately see bombs coming out, and those who are coming across on the Channel migrants, is because they're saying that most of the people coming over Channel migrants are young men between the ages of 18 to 42, 43 on our assessment. I know the government says 35. But then you also got the question of the fact that why are they coming alone from those countries? It's because they're looking for work. And people see that as a different issue. And if they felt differently, then those people, the politicians who support it, the actors, the pop stars, or even those working in the organizations would be offering them their own homes to live in, but they don't. What they do is say the government should be housing them, not those who are advocating more of them coming in.
Sofie, I just have to ask you, we only have a few minutes left now. I mean, given that Denmark is over a year ahead now of the UK in trying to push this program through, how do you see it unfolding? I mean, will it end in a kind of legal no man's land? And will Danes socially feel comfortable with this policy if it is enacted?
I think I've raised a number of concerns. I've said, is this really is it going to solve the current recognized refugee problems that we have in this world? I don't think so. Is it a humanitarian option? Probably not. Is it less expensive than the current system? Well, we can see the Australian model that it's definitely not less expensive. It's going to require a lot of expatriated staff. Is it just, I don't know, well, foreign politically, it's going to tie the countries to an African nation. If it's Rwanda, it is a police state. There's a lot of headway made in the last few decades. Kagame is a strong leader, but it's not a democracy, and it's not very strong on human rights. So, it's going to tie our foreign policy together and make us dependent on a police state in Africa. And also, I think, lastly, there is increasingly, I think, a public diplomacy issue in this. This is going to be, I've called it reality show. It's going to set up a situation that we will continuously have to deal with in Africa. And I think a lot of these questions have not been answered sufficiently, neither by the Danish government nor by the British.
Okay, Sile, we just have a minute left. So let me get your final thoughts here on where you think this legislation is really going.
So I think in terms of this actual proposal itself, I think we'll have to wait and see whether it ever gets enacted in any significant capacity. I think this government is really going to struggle to get this off the ground, and I think if it ever does, I think what we will be looking at will be a massive expansion of trafficking networks around Rwanda to take people who have been sent there from the UK back along more dangerous, more lengthy, and more expensive trafficking routes back into Europe. The traffickers are a step ahead of us on all of this, and they will simply adapt their networks and their processes to respond to the changes that are being made. And we will see more vulnerable people caught up in dangerous and exploitative situations as a result of this proposal by the UK government.
Okay, Sile Reynolds, Stephen Woolfe, and Sofie Allarp. Thank you all so much for being with us on this edition of Newsmakers, and our viewers, of course, for tuning in as well. Do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.